And beyond that, I'm sure you also want to know what to expect out of financial markets and the global economy in 2025. We bring you a fantastic, insightful presentation from Sue Munden, my colleague at Bloomberg Intelligence. And then finally this afternoon, our global editor of Bloomberg Live Experiences, Mark Miller, will be in conversation with Sian Beilock. She is the president of Dartmouth College in the United States. And if those of you who don't live in America have been paying attention, there's something of a crisis in American higher education. That is going to be a fascinating conversation. I look forward to it all. And allow me to hand it over to Brenda.
Please welcome to the stage Fabricio Bloisi, CEO of Prosus and Naspers, and Bloomberg's Brenda Tsai.
Hello.
Hello, everyone. Good afternoon. Welcome. Hello, Brenda.
Hello, Fabricio. Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome, Fabricio. Prosus had a big year last year with a $13 billion IPO of an Indian food delivery company. You also have very, very big plans for this coming year as well, with a potential listing in India and the acquisition of Latin America's largest travel agency.
Yes.
So my first question to start us off is just tell us, what has been your first 6 months as CEO been like, and what's your vision for Prosus for the future?
Yes, we have a nice year, but look, we are just starting. I just started, really. I'm here in Europe for 6 months. I was a founder of a tech Brazilian company, but now I manage Prosus. We have $150 billion in China, India, Africa, Europe, Latin America. And it has been amazing because I've been able to meet entrepreneurs all around the world, to invest all around the world. We are super excited about India. We just did an IPO, as I said, a few months ago. 2 months ago, we are expecting more, around 5 IPOs in India in this year. We just did a 1.7 billion transaction in Latin America. I expect to do much more. I think the vision is Prosus really can invest. We are a reasonable size company. We have almost 20 billion in cash. We really can invest on AI, disruption, innovation, and I think the world really needs it right now. We are seeing hundreds of billions of investments in California, but we need to invest in India, we need to invest in Africa, we need to invest in Latin America. I will be a little polemic. I think even here in Europe, we really need to invest much more, be more aggressive, move faster. So you said we had a great year. I think we haven't even started. Look forward to the next 12 months.
Well, excellent. That's really excellent. And when you talk about investments and technology, you cannot talk about those two things without talking about AI. So AI, you have mentioned, can be a great equalizer. How is AI, in your opinion, redefining the rules of engagement within the global digital economy?
AI can be an amazing equalizer or can make you 100 years behind, as what happened to many countries in the Industrial Revolution or the big navigations. That's the moment to take the decision if you want to lead on that or stay behind. So to me, AI is unbelievably important. Some people say, maybe there is a bubble. Yes, there is some companies that are overvalued, but the impact about how it changes our life completely, not in 10 years, but maybe in 5 or 4 or 3, it's massive. And I think the Americans are doing very well investing a lot in AI, but for sure the Europeans are not investing a lot. I'm CEO of a big European company. I had many meetings where people started saying, yeah, we have to see if we are going to train or use that here in Europe or in other place because there is the regulations, the AI Act, there is everything. Look, Europeans lead the world in terms of innovation during the Industrial Revolution and during the ships and the maps and telescope and microscope and so many things. But right now, they are behind. We are behind. So what is my vision on AI? AI can be an amazing equalizer, specifically to countries, to more poor countries. For example, I was talking about India today morning. Yeah. It's critical to India and Latin America to have AI in education and AI in healthcare. It's critical to Europe to keep leading, investing substantially more and moving faster in AI. And I think we have to change our mindset from a mindset of, can we do it? Let's regulate for 3 years before start, to know that this is going to change the world as much as the smartphone or the internet or electricity. We have to move faster if you don't want to be behind. And I think that's the position of Prosus. Prosus can invest as a big tech company, but in Europe, India, Latin America, and that's what we are doing.
So you mentioned a lot about the regions and how your strategy is changing. Are there other distinctions you've noticed between the way AI can be leveraged, the rate of adoption in AI in certain countries or regions? You mentioned a little bit about that, but do you mind going deeper into those differences?
Yes, there is many people thinking lots of the AI is being developed in US and China on the LLMs, but the most important part is how you do applications over that. And each country has to think how you find solutions that makes your own country better. So what we are doing in Brazil is different than what we are doing in India. Europe should be investing much more in applications using AI because it's going to change how all countries work and how segments work. I think what we are trying to do is that we are focused on these regions, not only in the valley, so we can spend much more time to empower local entrepreneurs to understand what are the amazing use cases we have there. A nice touch on that, we just published, I think 2 months ago, many use cases, like 7 or 8 use cases on how AI is disrupting today our companies in Brazil, in Europe, and India. So we are really sharing real data, numbers, KPIs about how our companies cannot survive anymore without AI today. So my tip for everyone is stop just after Davos on Friday, spend the whole Friday studying more how AI is going to change your company, your business, your career, because it will. If you don't know, you have a problem. And if you are in Europe, Africa, Latin America, and India, Prosus is investing a lot on that too, through education, investment in companies, and our own operations.
You also talked a lot about different regions and countries. It's hard to talk about those things without talking about regulation. Do you think regulation can be a big enabler for some of these countries as we look at technology changes like AI?
I think your question was a little funny. If regulation is a good enabler, look, AI has to be balanced to avoid increased inequalities. AI has to be well distributed. The problem that many countries are doing is try to regulate before you find something. It's difficult to regulate something that doesn't exist because then you reduce substantially the chance of creating something. So I'm super pro-regulation when the market develops, and you need to use regulation to make sure that the result is more fair. But if you say, let's start, first thing we are going to write, a good regulation. I think the chance you fail to lead the world is unbelievable high. So I don't think the regulation is the enabler. I think the regulation is we have to have the conscience that we need to work with the government to make sure that the end result is good. But to start, we need to move faster, take more risk, invest more, empower people and train people. Empower people in the companies, not only in the countries, but in the companies to take risk on how to do that. And I think that's our job in Prosus, that's our job in Bloomberg, talking more about that. Because look, the media also likes to talk about, is the world is going to end next month because of AI? Look, if you stop everything, then you are going to let a few places, maybe the Valley, maybe 1 or 2 other countries, to define how the future is. I think the future is going to be more democratic and more equal if many more people can understand the impact of this technology. That's what we believe.
Excellent. Well, we're sitting here in Davos in January, the start of 2025. What AI opportunities specifically are you most excited about?
I'm unbelievably excited about AI is going to disrupt so many things, synthetic biology and space. And last week, today everyone is talking about how AI is going to have a ChatGPT moment of robotics. So probably robotics is going to change substantially this year. So we have many areas to grow a lot. What Prosus is more focused about is the impact of AI on e-commerce. I think we saw AI a lot in language, then in video, then in images and sound. We believe that this is a year to AI-rich e-commerce. We call it large commerce model, that meaning using data for 2 billion people to understand how we can offer better service to them and cheaper products and deliver products to better and products to them. So that's our biggest challenge today.
Terrific. Well, I hope you can all join me in thanking Fabricio and thanking Prosus for sponsoring this session.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. We'll now turn it back to Eric.
Thank you.
Please welcome to the stage Ruth Porat, President and Chief Investment Officer of Alphabet and Google, with Bloomberg's Eric Schatzker.
Ruth, I am so happy that you could join me in my shoelaces here at Bloomberg House.
They're so elegant. It's always great to be with you, Eric.
So, folks, one of the reasons, Ruth, that all of these people are here in person and many more are watching live virtually is because they're dying to know what you think things are going to be like for big tech and how things are going to play out for Google now that President Trump is back in the White House. So, probably makes the most sense to start right there. Tell me what you think.
So look, I think the president and his team have been clear that they see technology as an asset for the country. They see the economic upside that comes with executing the right way. They want to clear away some of the impediments to investing, things like permitting, delays, et cetera, which is going to be an important part of providing the infrastructure backbone to power growth. And so I think that there's a tremendous amount of opportunity to continue working with them as we did in Trump 1.0.
These things are easy to say, hard to do. Do you feel optimistic about their chances for success?
When you say there, just expand a bit. I think the opportunity with AI is profound.
Oh, no. I meant the things that that President Trump and his team have been saying over the past several weeks about what they want to do in order to supercharge the U.S. economy and open up opportunities for American technology. I say those things are easy to say. Developing smart policy and furthermore executing smart policy, oftentimes, right, not so easy. And I'm curious to know, about your level of optimism, hopefulness, if you will, for what can be accomplished. You refer to it as Trump 1.0, what can be accomplished under Trump 2.0.
So I think generally I'm a tech optimist. I'm an optimist generally. I think, you know this, probably the most profound time in my career was in the Bush administration when Secretary Hank Paulson brought me to work with Treasury and then with Treasury and Fed during the financial crisis. And I think for all of us in the private sector, it's absolutely imperative to engage because, to your point, the devil's in the details in landing things the right way so that you don't have unintended consequences. There's quite a bit that needs to be done. I think, importantly, when we look at the implications and the upside from investing in AI, this is something that the U.S. and the West needs to continue to execute against and execute well because the implications are so great. It's not just economic upside, it's advancing science, it's what we can do with education and health, and it becomes a national security opportunity and imperative. And I think when you have economic strength, you have national security strength, and you work with your allies well, it continues to broaden out the kind of the keiretsu within which we're operating. And they've articulated that. So again, nothing is easy, you're right. But I think it requires each of us to constructively engage, as I expect they will, as we most certainly want to make sure things get landed in the most productive way.
Helps to explain, I suppose, why Sergey Brin, co-founder of Google, of course, and Sundar, your CEO, spent some time with President Trump in the weeks following the inauguration, as did many other leading figures in the tech industry. Ruth, you made mention of your advisory work for the U.S. government back around the financial crisis. I'm glad you did, actually, because it helps to establish some important context. Those of you here recognize Ruth in her current role and maybe her immediate precedent role. She's now the president and chief investment officer at Google and Alphabet, and before that she was the chief financial officer since 2015. But before that she had a whole other career on Wall Street at Morgan Stanley, where in the 1990s she headed tech banking. She ended up running financial institutions banking, and then, as you mentioned, you helped to advise the U.S. government on AIG, Fannie and Freddie, and you were the CFO at Morgan Stanley as well. And I mention this because I'm going to come back to it a little later in our conversation. In the meantime, help me out on a personal level. What do you hope for most out of this kind of political, at the very least, political reset that America has experienced with this election?
You know, I look at it really at this point through the lens that we're all privileged to live in a time where AI can be applied not just to economic upside, but when you look, for example, at what we're able to do to address some of the really big social imperatives around healthcare delivery, around education. You know, notably, my colleague Demis Hassabis, when he won the Nobel Prize, was awarded the Nobel Prize last fall for AlphaFold, described as the single greatest contribution to drug discovery, with our colleague John Jumper as well. But he was asked in his Nobel speech, and he said what really motivated him and what motivates him is solving the most intractable problems. And when you think about the application of AI to health as an example, early detection saves lives. At Google, we have pioneered early detection of metastatic cancer, lung cancer, breast cancer. We're doing it with diabetic retinopathy. These are really exciting. So when you say, how is this administration going to open new opportunities? What are we going to land? There's a whole swath. If you want, again, go back to the opening comment. They have said tech is an asset. We want economic growth. We want to cut through inefficiency. These are opportunities. And on the inefficiency point, it's one I get pretty excited about, as you probably would imagine. There's tremendous inefficiency across public and private sector. One of the questions...
You don't say.
Yeah, go figure, except at Bloomberg. One of the questions I'm most often asked by finance ministers is they say, I'm not going to get more budget. How do I make my budget work better for my constituents? How do I unlock it? And there are so many examples with tech, which of course is what the Trump administration wants to do as part of DOGE. But I'll just give you one that I really like. We did this in the state of Minnesota. We've done it in a number of places. They said we need to be able to deliver better for our constituents, payments and other responses. So implemented our AI-based customer support. And they initially said we have 4 critical languages in Minnesota. Can you help us do it in 4 languages? Google Translate, we have 260 languages. 4 languages was no problem. 6 months later, they wanted to add another 26 languages. And I just, you know, when I'm meeting with heads of state from around the globe, they have a similar set of questions. And it's fascinating where they'll say, I can't actually deliver education to kids without Google Translate. So the ability to deliver services is all part of what I think we're going to be able to see across what the Trump administration intends to do, but more broadly.
You mentioned DOGE. No one appears to wield more influence at the moment over President Trump than Elon Musk. And I'm curious, I know other people are curious because I've talked to them about this. Is having Elon so close to the president on balance a positive or a negative for the tech industry?
For the tech industry, you're not saying for the country. An interesting question.
Well, but that might be where I'm going next, Ruth.
Okay. I think about it in the context of the country. Look, the reality, I just
For
said
the planet?
For
the universe?
For Mars. So, look, he is an extraordinary innovator and entrepreneur. Few like him. I think we all know that. You know, we're at Google very involved with quite a number of the businesses that he's incubated and built. SpaceX is a great example, and what an extraordinary accomplishment that is. Anybody who has not used Starlink has to try Starlink. And so to have somebody at this time where you're trying to unlock the potential for AI. It is not a foregone conclusion that each one of us, public and private sector, will radically rethink what we're doing in a way that gets the trillions of dollars of GDP upside. That is work to do. So to have somebody who is such an entrepreneur and broad thinker will be an unlock, and to understand that technology is a critical part of both productivity and social service solutions has to be an asset.
He can be a mercurial guy, and he's a little unpredictable at times. Some describe him as a little unfiltered. That can all be considered positive or negative, but beyond what he might help to unlock in the way of opportunity for tech, to your point, for the country and perhaps more broadly for the world, are the ideas that Elon is bringing to not just President Trump himself, but those around him in government, healthy?
You're talking about a broad set
I
of
sure
issues.
am.
I know. I'm going to stay in my lane, which I tell people all the time, stay in your lane, and I'm going to stick in the tech lane. So there are solutions that should be implemented. Each one of us needs to implement it, and I will leave it to others to go more broadly.
How about for Google? You mentioned that Google and Alphabet work collaboratively with some of Elon's companies. He's also a competitor of yours in a couple of other areas. He occupies a unique position right now with influence over government policy that affects the companies the industries, that he's in and that you're in. Is that a risk?
Well, let me take one of my favorite examples of something important that we're working on, and that is Waymo, self-driving cars.
Right.
And he's clearly focused for Tesla on self-driving. More than 1 million people die on the road every year through human error. We're not going to save every life with self-driving cars, but we're already seeing data that shows already today a meaningful delta in safety errors issues with Waymo. And in order to actually have the accelerated rollout, that makes sense. We always lead with Waymo. It's got to be safety first. But you can still accelerate. We should have in the U.S. a comprehensive approach to self-driving and what are the standards around it. So there are some areas where actually having another voice at the table around what is proper regulation. We think that you need to have transparency around all issues of engagement, safety risks, et cetera. There are proper high bars that actually make it really clear that we're delivering not only a great rider experience. Anyone who goes to San Francisco has to try this. It's one of the top tourist attractions. But that's a positive. Like Waymo, the momentum in Waymo is pretty extraordinary. We have with Waymo self-driven 5 million miles, 4 million of which were in the last year alone. So it gives you a sense of kind of where this is going.
The hockey stick curve.
It gives you a hockey stick curve where we're leading with safety. But there are opportunities when you actually have competition to try and establish what is a proper governance protocol around it.
Would you feel comfortable if TikTok were sold to X?
Oh my gosh, when are we going to talk about our business?
I'm about to.
You heard him. Move on.
So, the president, in an interview that he did with no, we're going there. I promise you, Ruth. We are going straight to Google. I promise. So the president, now President, of course, Trump, in an interview with my editor-in-chief, John Micklethwaite, back in October, suggested that, unlike the Biden administration, he might not want to break Google up because he sees it as a bulwark against Chinese technology. His direct quote, China is afraid of Google. How much should we read into that, and what does that suggest about the prospects for Google now that we are in a different era?
You know, we clearly are of the view that the DOJ's proposed remedies make no sense, that we're delivering a product solution that customers want that delivers tremendous value. And it wasn't lost on many people that actually the same time that was coming out, the Nobel Committee thought it was wise to give Demis and John Jumper a Nobel Prize for this extraordinary breakthrough with AlphaFold. I've already commented on it briefly, but predicting protein structure for all proteins known to mankind, 200 million proteins. When Demis embarked on that, another one, I always quote a Nobel Prize winner as a colleague. It's like a great place to be. But one of his colleagues or a group of scientists said, how can it be? How can you possibly do this? And his answer is, why not? And as a result of saying, why not, we now have open source to the world something that is being credited as with the single greatest contribution to drug discovery. And why not has become the phrase that I use for each one of us. Like, why not radically rethink what is possible with education? Why not radically rethink how do you get early diagnosis to everyone around the planet? Why don't you why not think about the third of the people who are still not connected? So are we a bulwark? I think that this is a critical time. Inflection points are not as evident in the moment as they are later. And as a country, we should embrace it. As a company, we most certainly are. We're investing aggressively, and I think it's important that we continue to do so. So that's the way we're approaching it.
AI.
Thank you. One person.
AI, to your point, has such tremendous potential to transform companies. Not just, certainly has the potential to transform economies, it has the potential to transform the way we live, but it has the potential to transform companies, right? Including yours. So share with us a sense of how AI is, at this very moment, transforming Google. What are you using it for? How is it making the company more streamlined, more efficient, allowing it to perhaps redeploy resources into other areas?
So I think that one of the fascinating elements about where we are on this AI curve is economists have pretty broad range of estimates about the economic upside. In the trillions in the U.S. alone, it's up to 25 trillion by 2030 globally. The numbers are pretty staggering. And what they mean is that you do need to radically rethink your business. We are all, anyone who is currently playing with Gemini or any one of the other ones out there, we're at the early stages of the application of it. So Sundar has talked about this, where leveraging Gemini and the opportunity basically as support for software engineers. It's freeing them up to do additional higher value add work. We are still on that journey in finance. There are opportunities with how we analyze every element of data. Think about it. There are large data sets. What are we doing on working capital? What are we doing on closing the books? What are we doing on forecasting? Our tax people looking at it to digest information. So it is, but the reason I started with the trillions is the key question continues to be, so what are those radical rethink opportunities? That's a curve that we, like everyone, continue to go down. And I think that what we're most excited about is when we see across the board thinking about, okay, I'm a logistics company. How do I actually optimize routes, save on fuel as a result, get things done faster? It's like each one, any process any of us has, we can step back and look at how we can fundamentally change what we're doing. You just need to start really on the journey. You need to get the puck on the ice, because the more you use it, the more you benefit from it. See the doors that open.
Ruth knows that as a Canadian, I really love the hockey metaphor, so thank you.
You love the hockey metaphor. And I will say one other thing. There was some very concerning data that women actually are not getting the puck on the ice at the same rate as men. This research just came out at UC Berkeley. And I would say this is a moment in history. Every moment of change is one where individually you can have breakaway moments. And so we do believe in everything that we do. The power of what we're bringing, I look at it as a triangle, is that the products and services are an unlock. You don't get the unlock if we don't invest in infrastructure, and if you don't have a talent pool that is able and knows how to leverage what the new skills are that are required. So we created something called an AI Opportunity Fund, where we're providing AI digital skilling. I just want to do a shout out to women. Don't let that gap persist, because the rate of change is too fast.
Since you brought it up, President Trump, many people around him, including Elon, have declared war on what Elon calls the woke mind virus, and As a result of that, we're seeing very broadly in corporate America a pullback from diversity, equity, and inclusion initiatives. Do you worry, Ruth, about the impact that's going to have on, the opportunities for women in the workforce?
Look, at Google, we want to, and have always wanted to attract the best talent out there. And the best talent comes from all places. We want people to have the opportunity to deliver the best quality work they can. And that's what we remain focused on. You're absolutely right, between the Supreme Court opinion and some other, there are pronouncements that are coming out, but it should continue to be about attracting the best talent and creating opportunities.
Very specifically on the subject of AI, as it concerns Google, does it herald the end of the search era?
No. What we've seen, I'm glad you asked the question, because we obviously love search. When you think about Google, Google started with 10 blue links. And there have been times throughout Google's life, in fact, when I joined Google in 2015, one of the questions was, where to from here? Can Google and search make this transition from desktop to mobile? It's gone from 10 blue links, text search, voice search, Lens. How many of you have used Lens on your phone where you just, it's an absolutely extraordinary, I don't know how to live without it. The number, take your camera, point it at whatever you want, and it's a way to search. You can find products, inventory, you can learn about foliage, whatever you need to know.
People here are dying to learn about foliage.
That was one of my first uses, like identified what a bird was. But it's an extraordinary, 20 billion uses a month. It's an absolutely extraordinary additional form of search. And what we've talked about is the world has gone from these 10 blue links, text, visual, multimodal. It will continue to evolve. And what we're seeing with AI overviews, which I view as sort of a cockpit to take you through search, where it actually will, leveraging AI, give you a summary. In many respects, it's a shortcut, and then you know where to double click to go in. And so we're trying to make it easier and help users evolve. What it enables you to do is really ask questions in different ways. And the context box is bigger, so you can actually explore. And it's the kind of evolution you have when you go from text to voice. It's a different way of search, but in particular, we're seeing with younger people that they are continuing to engage.
So 5 years from now, how will I be searching, so to speak, on Google or on some kind of a Google interface? And more importantly, from the standpoint of the company, how will you take, you mentioned that you love search, how do you take the phenomenal revenue that search generates and generate that in something, different, AI-driven, presumably?
So there are two parts to the question. One is we're very focused, as others are, on what is called agentic. How do you use AI to actually help you accomplish the tasks that you want to accomplish, become more of a personal assistant to you? And so what's fascinating is where does AI enable us to go to be ever more useful? And if you think about Google's mission to organize the world's information, make it universally accessible and useful, that mission is as true today with a different backbone of technology that's enabling you to be even more efficient, useful, accessible. How to monetize, we and everyone else continues to focus on what is monetization. There's been an expression at Google since day one. First you drive the user experience, monetization will follow. Clearly, this is an expensive area with the investments in compute. So we're very focused on how to ensure we're driving a return on invested capital over the long term. But the most important thing is to get the experiences right, because you don't have a product if you don't get the experiences right, which is where we're continuing to drive and I think really lead with the work that Demis and Google DeepMind are doing.
I've been paying very close attention to the race. You alluded to this earlier, the race between the United States, or the West if you prefer, and China to dominate in AI. Who's winning?
Well, that's a great question, because I think to date, the U.S. is ahead in models. We're probably a year plus ahead in models. The West is ahead in chips. I think China is on par and may even be a bit ahead on what's called diffusion of basic capabilities. I mentioned that this unlock of the economic upside, requires what's called diffusion across industries, the application across public sector, private sector in a way where you do radically rethink what you're doing. Don't just use Gemini or the others to help you write a memo. Like, rethink processes. Call centers are a great example. It's such an obvious place where you can deliver better service, lower cost. So anecdotally, on par, but they may be a bit ahead. The important thing is it can't be taken for granted that the U.S. or the West stays in the lead. And when we look at it, there are a couple of really critical elements that must be put in place. And it really goes back to your first question, how to engage with the Trump administration. You need the right regulatory framework. It needs to be bold and responsible. I'll come back to what we need. So the right regulatory framework. You need the right investment framework to make sure you crowd in private sector capital and you have the right public-private sector collaboration. And you also need, I think, importantly, to think not just within your boundary, but what partners globally, what other countries are in this broader ecosystem. Because the one thing I hear with every head of state with whom I meet is we want to be part of the digital transformation. We'd rather do it with the U.S., but in the absence of the U.S. being present, we will do it. And so I think level of engagement, things like what the AI diffusion rule that came out last week, how to make sure you can actually deliver for countries outside the U.S. is critically important. And on regulation, simple mnemonic device for you, fab, which is not like a semiconductor fab. You need to be focused. Like, regulation shouldn't be one size fits all. The risk associated with email autocomplete is not the same as in healthcare. And so make sure that if you're imposing regulation, it doesn't become the quagmire that slows down what we're doing in the West. It needs to be focused by sector. If we already have regulation, for example, with healthcare devices, you don't need a separate regulation because it's an AI healthcare device. Leverage what's already existing there. It needs to be aligned across geographies. Like, if you have a patchwork quilt, that is going to impede investment. I'm not going to want to invest if I've got to have a separate set of rules and limitations. They go to the bottom of the list. And then balance test its whole as a risk manager. In my prior life, sometimes the risk of saying no is substantially greater than the risk of saying yes. We're going to not save lives if we say no on healthcare, the healthcare opportunity with AI or the Waymo opportunity with AI. So those are the ways we can stay in the lead. It is not a foregone conclusion.
Simple acronyms.
I like
fab.
simple, right? It's
They're
fab.
fab.
They're totally fab.
Do you think, Ruth, geopolitically speaking, do you think of artificial general intelligence, quantum computing, and perhaps fusion power as winner-take-all technologies?
I thought you were going to go somewhere else. I view them as, first, a number of years off, and second, extremely exciting what we might be able to do. And, on quantum, we announced a breakthrough
Last month,
I think it was, with Willow in
a computer chip.
Computer chip that enables you to achieve a computation in less than 5 minutes that would have taken 10 septillion years on the greatest supercomputer that's around, which is 24 zeros, because I had to Google it to find out how many zeros were on that. The application to biology, other sciences, longer term, is pretty extraordinary. It'll give us insight that we haven't had, or computation speed. So there are opportunities. You can't slow the pace. You can't put a halt in technology. Never have been able to. And I think the question is the appropriate application of it.
Okay. How long, since you brought it up, well, I mentioned quantum, you talked about Willow. How long until quantum computing leaves the lab and enters the real world?
It's going to surprise you, but I ask Hartmut, who leads the quantum AI lab, that all the time.
And what does he tell you?
For years. Look, they're continuing to make advances along the way. It's still probably a couple of years out before you see specific applications, but we're already seeing things now that are very exciting. And
how long do you figure until Google is able to make a business out of it? That's
it's
that kind of thing.
Well, look, in each one of these things, there are certain things that are on the whiteboard that are pretty exciting, and I think we'll save it for another conversation.
Okay. Watch this space, I suppose. I mentioned that I was going to return to your previous career. In this context.
Hopefully I'm not.
Well, you could talk to us about your next career, but we'll get to that at the end of the conversation. Tech is full of debates about risk, right? The so-called unintended consequences of doing X, Y, or Z. As someone schooled in financial risk management, how do you think about risk management in tech? Is it the same thing? Is it different? Do you apply learnings from one to the other? Tell us.
You know, just this morning I was at a meeting with a head of state and talking about the financial crisis, which actually surprised me that we would be talking about it. But I think one of the most important lessons on risk management from the financial crisis is that every one of us should identify our greatest source of vulnerability and protect against it early.
Pardon me?
Because you can always protect, in my experience, you can protect against something early. During the financial crisis, the greatest source of vulnerability was liquidity. That is what choked off your operations. You couldn't get it in the moment. You could get it months prior. And so when I got to
there
Google,
when you don't need it, not there when you need it.
Inexpensive when you don't need it, impossible when you do need it. Fortify early. And so when I got to Google and people asked me lessons from the financial crisis, risk management lessons, and I shared that one, the obvious question is, so what is it for Google? And a lot of it is really about ensuring that we have the infrastructure capacity, it's innovation, obviously, and infrastructure resilience to be able to deliver in all environments, because that's what people count on us to do. And you can't have a data center like that. This has been a 25-year build to have capacity. So step one is how are you operating? Beyond that, risk management, I think another lesson from the crisis, why did AIG blow itself up? They didn't understand the magnitude of risks they had in their derivative sub in the UK. And so one of the most important lessons for all of us, you need to have data that in a pithy way gives you a cockpit to run your business. It's the data analytics that enable you to make the right decisions, and a decision framework is critically important. And so for each of us, I mean, that is one of the areas we spend a lot of time. Internally, it's one of the things we do with our partners.
In 2023, you took on this role of president and CIO, in addition at the time to being CFO, which you're not any longer, and that might be, for your sake, a very good thing. I'm sure you missed those quarterly earnings calls.
So much.
Why did you choose to stay at Google in this role as opposed to perhaps, and I suspect you thought about it, people may even have talked to you about it, going off and running a company, being the CEO somewhere? What is it about this role that was so appealing to you?
I think there are a few times in the history of the planet where we have had a technology change as exciting as AI. And I've talked about the upside with AI, which is not just the economic upside, but the breakthroughs in science. All of the why not questions, why not radically rethink education, healthcare, every element of it. It's a privilege to be in this position. And the role has two parts, which, again, hard to envision. We reach billions of people around the globe, and the solutions that we're able to provide are pretty mind-blowing. And so when I think about, one key part of it is working around the globe with those who are saying, how do I unlock the capacity and the potential with AI? How is it I get access to these products and services? And it comes back to the triangle I talked about. Well, where do we engage with deep technical infrastructure, subsea cables? Where do we actually engage with workforce development, education? And how do we, Alphabet, deliver a return for shareholders on that so that we can continue to reinforce? There are a few times in history like this. It's pretty cool. And the stories from around the globe of how do I deal with maternal health care in Africa, where women are still dying when they shouldn't. We have solutions where you can go in the field, and it makes a difference working with partners. Mm-hmm. And then it's the whole other bets portfolio. It's being able to work with the Waymos of the world, or we have a number of others, Wing, which is a drone company, Intrinsic, which is an operating system for robotics, Isomorphic, leveraging AlphaFold. hard to see something that has more of an
Approximates
impact.
that.
Yeah.
So this is your first full year not having to worry about those quarterly earnings and not having to do those analyst calls.
I still worry, because we all need to worry. As holders, we need to be.
I'm sure there's some things you can't quite let go of, but 12 months from now, what does success look like?
Continuing to extend the impact that we have globally, working with partners, delivering these things I've been talking about that drives a return for Alphabet, and ongoing sharpening the focus within other bets, as we've talked about, and being back with you, obviously.
On that note, ladies and gentlemen, please join me in thanking Ruth Porat.
If 2024 was the year of political earthquakes, then 2025 is already the year of the aftershock, as new leaders seek to disrupt the status quo. Will America embrace tariffs and risk a more fragmented, inflationary global economy? Could European debt balloon as NATO countries spend more on defense? Will China double down on export-led solutions to its economic troubles? And could new technologies force a radical rethink of regulation and the future of innovation? Governments will initiate major policy changes, but the unintended consequences and the reaction from business leaders, innovators, entrepreneurs, and citizens everywhere are the biggest unknowns. This is Bloomberg's The Year Ahead at Davos.
Please welcome to the stage Bloomberg's Sue Munden.
Good afternoon, everyone. I'm going to share with you this afternoon 5 topics that our global team think that we need to watch for global equities in 2025. The 5 things are not Trump, 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 and Trump, but very close. We're going to start with where the equity markets are at the moment, where the expectations are, and what consensus thinks for 2025, so that we've got a ground level to work from. Second, our new President Trump, who I don't expect to be quiet. Third, we're going to look at China and Europe, 2 regions that we think have quite a lot to grapple with this year. Fourthly, AI, what happens beyond the hyperscalers. And fifth, we're going to look at private capital, which is gaining share in markets and is looking perhaps to democratize access. So let's start with the markets. Here, normalized over 2 years, you can see the main indices around the world. The S&P 500 up 52%. The Nikkei's done well as well, off a low base. But the main reason for that is what we term the Magnificent Seven. So that's the top 7 tech companies in the world. And they've actually gone up 2.5 times over 2 years. The rest of the world, though, although it looks very flat down at the bottom, are up about 30%. So they've performed well over the last couple of years. Where evaluations, on the bottom part of the chart, you can see that the price-earnings ratio for the Magnificent Seven is about 31 times. And the rest spans between 19 times and for the S&P X, the Magnificent Seven, and 13 times in Europe. So they're fairly full valuations. This slide gives us the earnings, the actual earnings per quarter, and what the analysts thought they would be pre the announcements. And you'll see that since 2021, the only period which is surrounded by the red circle there is the third quarter of 24, where the actuals haven't beaten consensus. So there's a lot of expectation in the market to deliver. And also, if you look at the expectations going forward to 26, those numbers are quite punchy. These are the growth numbers here, and you're looking at high single digit and into the teens. So we feel that a whiff of disappointment may raise the risk premiums and tension in the market. So that's the first thing that we need to watch. Second, President Trump. There was a good panel yesterday. I don't know whether any of you saw it on Trumponomics. And I tend to agree with their conclusions that, you know, the result is that there's, Trump really wants to shock, but he also is prone to change his mind. But he does watch the markets, and so that may be one way that he can be curtailed. If we look at the policies that we've listed here on the slide, taxes and deregulation are pro-growth, and then the other camp is the inflationary policies, like tariffs and his immigration policy. The chart there is showing the reaction of the US dollar and treasuries, 10-year and 2-year, since he won the election in July. And you'll see they've reacted quite strongly, with the dollar, I think, up about 8%. I'd like to look a little bit more into tariffs. I mean, those first and his general policies, I think, are going to cause volatility in markets. We have seen that in the past with new presidents. We often see a lot of volatility as they sort of settle in over the first period. But with Trump, I think we're going to see that continuing because of this, you know, change in his view quite often. Looking at the tariffs, they're really big numbers he's banded around. I'm sure a lot of us feel that that's his opening gambit. But nevertheless, in his first term, the tariffs that he input, which is this line chart, he managed to increase the average import prices into the US by about 3%. The numbers he's talking about now, if they were implemented, would increase the average import prices by over 20%. That's really big numbers, numbers we haven't seen since 1935. So these are really big changes he's asking about. And you can see from the chart on the other side there that, no surprises, Canada, China, and Mexico are the largest trade partners affected by this. So from an equity point of view, we suggest that you really do look bottom up at companies, because a big American multinational, obviously based in the US, is bound to get its supply chain from all around the world. And so those parts and even the finished goods are going to have to be re-imported into the US in order for them to sell them. So they're going to get hit by those tariffs. In fact, there's some analysis I've seen that says that Canadian companies are going to be better off than the American ones if they impose this tariff, because of the direction of where the ultimate consumer is. So the second point there, volatility in markets and bottom-up analysis is important. On to our next topic, which is China and Europe. These two countries have quite big challenges. And the question is, will Trump's policies exaggerate these challenges, or will it spur them into action to try and mitigate them? In China, as I'm sure you all know, it's facing the point in time when the people who were born prior to the one-child policy are retiring. And so the labour market is shrinking very rapidly, and this is causing the chart there showing GDP growth expectations slowing quite considerably. It's the main driver there. They can't do much about the demographics, but they are trying to stimulate the economy, and they've got initiatives to try and grow innovation and tech, with high-tech related final demand expectations rising to about 20% of the market by the end of the decade. So the question is, can they do that? And along with the tariffs that might be imposed, which way is it going to go? In Europe, the picture is slightly different. Have we actually got to peak pessimism? We've got really soggy economic growth, if at all. We've got industrial contraction. We have a war in Ukraine, political turmoil, especially in France and Germany, and growth in nationalist movements. Importantly, though, this chart shows the change in productivity between Europe and the US, the gap there that has occurred since 2020, and this is the impact on GDP. It's about 18%, and it's going down even further. So what can Europe do to arrest that? Draghi wrote a report last year suggesting much more collaboration, and maybe the need for greater defense spending and R&D will get the Europeans to collaborate more And obviously, with the overload of potential tariffs, Trump might stimulate more of that. So those are the question marks over those two areas. Moving on to AI, and we've talked about this a lot today. We still believe the hyperscalers will do very well, and indeed they're one of the main drivers of those quite punchy earnings consensus estimates. However, I think we'll be able to start looking beyond that to the semis, semi-equipment, and also to infrastructure, data centers, and the power that is needed to supply those data centers. We've been looking in our research, which I'll give you some links to at the end, sector by sector on how we think AI is going to affect them. This is a slide here from on the right-hand side from a B2B survey that we conducted in December. We asked the CTOs of 97 global banks lots of questions, but one of them was this, that where do they believe they're going to get the biggest productivity gains from AI? And top of the list there is risk management and fraud detection, as you can see, followed by enhanced data and analytics, and consumer services, the third. They also said that they expected to get productivity gains of about 5 to 10% over that period. Private capital is our last topic. This is an area that has grown very rapidly. As you can see from that top chart there, table, private equity is expected to grow, the assets under management are expected to grow 103% from to 2029, from a 2023 baseline. The dry powder, money that they've actually raised but haven't invested, is in the order of 3 to 4 trillion. What is that going to do to markets? I mean, obviously, they will be looking more to privatize companies, but also they're looking to try and democratize it. Both State Street and Apollo have announced that they would like to launch private debt ETFs. Personally, I think that's going to come with a good overlay of regulation, given the risks involved. Anyway, it's on the market. On the next slide, you can see this is from public markets. On the left-hand side, that's the amount of companies that have been privatized. And on the right-hand side, it's the number of IPOs. So you can see they've just plummeted. So the public markets are really losing at the expense of private markets. Sorry, the other way around. Private markets are... I'll get it right. You know what I mean. Right, so that's the end of the 5 topics. This slide here, I'm just going to leave it up for a second so that you can perhaps scan the QR code. Those are the front pages of deep dive research, and by that we mean research that is in-depth analysis, 50 to 60 or more pages, collaborations across our team. Our team at BI consists of 475 investment professionals with an average experience of 15 years. We cover 2,000 companies across the world, and we have teams covering equities, corporate credit, fixed income, FX. We have teams strategy for all of that as well. We cover market structure and ESG. For everything BI, for those of you who have a terminal, please go to BI Go. So with that, I'll just give a quick summary of what I've said today, that we see markets are quite fully priced. There is a lot of growth to come. However, any disappointment increases the risk on the market. Secondly, Trump probably means some volatility, especially in the first year. The tariffs, inflationary, and on top of that, we feel that you need to look to a bottom-up analysis to be careful about the supply chains and the impact that has on margins. In China and Europe, what is going to be the outcome? Are these problems going to be exaggerated by Trump, or are they going to step up and improve stimulus or collaborate, depending on which region we're looking at there? AI, look beyond the hyperscalers, and private credit is very, very powerful. So with that, I would like to hand over to Mark Miller and say thank you very much for listening to me, and good afternoon.
Please welcome to the stage Sian Beilock, president of Dartmouth, and Bloomberg's Mark Miller.
Thank you. Nothing like Davos to rush our next speaker on stage. Thank you for doing this.
Oh, I'm happy to be here.
So, Sian Beilock, became president of Dartmouth in 2023, the first female president of Dartmouth. Before that, you were the president of Barnard College. And before that, you were the executive vice provost of the University of Chicago. And there's a Chicago thread through our conversation that we'll talk about as we get to this. She's also a cognitive scientist. And if you want to know why we choke when we do public speaking, go to a TED Talk that she gave that's now been widely viewed. And I'm going to ask you about your own experience. Have you ever choked?
Every day.
Every day. But first, I wanted to start with a bit of a recap for those of you in the United States and even outside the U.S., I think at other institutions of higher learning. Obviously, the past, since October 7th, has been a tumultuous time on many campuses, particularly the elite American universities. It's been a trying time for you and your fellow college presidents, university presidents. But you have actually navigated it in ways that some of your peers have not. And we'll get into what that was about. But just as a kind of recap, obviously the attack happens October 7th, the Hamas attack on Israel. Pretty soon after that, campus protests began in earnest. Campuses across the U.S. are convulsed with protests in favor of Palestinian rights. Almost 3,000 students ultimately were arrested across the United States, including, I think, almost 60 at your institution, Dartmouth. There was a very famous congressional hearing that occurred in December 2023, where the MIT president, Sally Kornbluth, the Penn president, Liz Maggel, Harvard's Claudine Gay, Columbia's Manoush Shafiq, all testified before Congress. Today, only Kornbluth remains a president of a university of that group. Were you approached to testify?
No.
Are you glad you didn't? Or would you have liked to have testified?
I'm always happy to speak to what I see as the power of higher education, and especially what happens in U.S. universities. But what I would talk about, and what I always talk about, is what our mission is. And our mission is as an educational institution. Our mission is not as a political institution. Our mission is not as a social activist institution. Our mission is to be centered so that we can allow different views on either side. So we teach students how to think, not what to think.
So take us back. I mean, you've been involved in university life for quite a while as a professor, as a student, then as a professor, and then as an administrator. How did we get to a point where we were, where there was this convulsion of protests that did threaten, in many ways, the ability of the institutions to do their job? How do you diagnose that?
I mean, I always go back to who holds the values of an institution, and at the most basic level, it's the faculty. And what happened on Dartmouth's campus after October 7th is that our faculty in Jewish studies and Middle Eastern studies came together in public to lead a dialogue and debate around the Middle East. And they modeled what it was like to have civil discourse. And I think that's such an important part of what students need to see on campus. They have to see different viewpoints. They have to understand how to have a dialogue, and they have to see the common humanity in each other.
So we'll get to a little bit more of how you see the role of students in this process. But to continue on the theme of the faculty, last December 10th, I believe, recommendations or new policy, the principles of institutional restraint were issued by a faculty-led advisory committee, as I believe which very clearly seems to be a descendant of something called the Calvin Report from 1967, which was a product of the University of Chicago, which has been a leader in many ways in this area of the institution maintaining neutrality unless it directly affects that campus. Did you convene that group of faculty or ask them to do that?
Yeah, my provost convened the group, and really the idea was, again, to be clear about what our mission is. And at its most basic level, going back to the fact that we're an educational institution, the idea is that as a president, I speak to our educational mission, but I don't speak to issues that might put the institution on one side or another that are unrelated to our mission, because that can quell the critics on our campus. And the Calvin Report, I think, said this best. The goal for a university is not to be the critic itself, but to allow those critics to foster. And it goes back to what we do. We create leaders and we create knowledge. And the way to do that, I believe the data are really clear, are to bring people with different perspectives, different backgrounds, different ideas to campus, and have them be an environment where they feel free to speak their mind. They feel free to push and debate each other. That doesn't mean robbing others of their free expression by shouting them down or setting up an encampment and declaring it for one ideology. But the goal is to create a space where people feel free expressing their views. And the idea is it's harder to do that if I'm taking a political position, or even my departments, my academic departments are taking a political position. And that's what I'm so proud about what we did at Dartmouth and our Dartmouth Principles of Institutional Restraint, is that they speak to what I do as a leader, but the faculty also espouse those views for the academic departments to which students and other faculty interact.
Is that policy, that institutional restraint, is that absolute? Is there a scenario you can envision in which you, as the president of Dartmouth, would need to make a statement on behalf, or the board would need to make a statement on behalf of the school about something that is not necessarily core to the mission of the school?
Yeah, institutional neutrality or restraint doesn't mean that an institution doesn't speak, but it means that it speaks and it tries to speak when it's relevant to our mission as an institution. And so I do think that is really important. I mean, it's not absolute. These are recommendations and policies. And the idea as a leader, though, is that I'm underscoring what we are there to do, which is to educate, to create academic excellence, to create the next generation of global leaders.
Now, your critics in the student body particularly have said that this idea of civility really is more of an attempt to quelch debate, that means limiting their ability to really make their voices heard on how they feel about what has happened in Gaza. What do you say to that?
Yeah, I think it's exactly the opposite. Protest is fine, and it's a really important part of expression. Dialogue is great, I think, when you can talk to one another. But where we tend to draw the line is that when one person's free expression robs someone else. So you can protest, but you can't shout down a speaker. You can be outside telling me all the things you don't like. Even in our institutional restraint policy, we had a faculty dissenter who wrote a view that we published as well. But when one person's free expression robs someone else of their free expression, or the safety and security of my campus is put in jeopardy, where some students don't feel like they're safe on campus, that's when myself and my fellow university presidents have to be clear about, again, what the mission of universities are for. They are to educate, they are to bring people together, they are not to be political or social litmus tests for particular viewpoints.
Why do you think some of your peers, particularly in the Ivies, were reluctant to take forceful action in the ways that you did?
Yeah, I mean, I can't speak to the decision-making process of my peers during those moments, but what I can say is that for Dartmouth, it goes back to what our North Star is. And I operate based on that North Star always, which is to find those students excelling in their environment across the globe, wherever that is, bring them to Dartmouth, create an environment where they can learn how to think, not what to think, and then go out and be leaders. And we follow that in everything we do. And I think that has allowed us to create the kinds of conditions where students think it's positive to push at each other rather than to shout each other down. And that's some of what I'm most proud of. We have a political union on our campus that's one of the only student-led bipartisan political unions in the United States, and they have modeled how to do this. In the fall, for example, they had Kellyanne Conway and Donna Brazile for a debate. We've had everyone from Mike Pence to Stacey Abrams to Anita Hill on campus. The whole idea is to bring different voices to campus so our students are exposed to different ideas and to create a culture where having a dialogue, seeing the common humanity in someone, even who you vehemently disagree with, is seen as really the beneficial thing to do. We talk about creating brave spaces rather than just safe spaces.
Earlier today, we heard from someone I'm sure you're familiar with, NYU professor Jonathan Haidt, the author of The Anxious Generation, who has, in his book and in his talk with us today, decried the inability of students today to really tolerate, much less engage, in dissenting points of view. And he actually blames sort of social media for that. You know, it allows us to hide. It doesn't teach us, our kids, how to engage with people face to face in some way. Is that something that you've seen? What do you attribute this lack of willingness to engage to?
Yeah, I mean, Jonathan is an expert more than I have, but I understand the data around social media, and I find it pretty compelling. But when it comes down to it, I think dialogue and learning how to engage is a skill that you can learn with practice. It's a muscle like anything else. And so we have a whole initiative at Dartmouth called Dartmouth Dialogues, where part of it involves teaching our students how to have this engagement and dialogue. So all of our first-year students coming in at the undergraduate level, many of our medical students, our business students, our engineering, are taking place and taking part in workshops where they're learning how to have conversations with folks that they hadn't spoken to before, to listen, to hear different points of view. And again, with social media, with technology, it's often easy to move away from that. We actually know a lot of people, our young people especially, are scared to make a phone call.
Right.
And the whole idea is that we are going to practice those skills. And I will say that it's not just young people that we know have a lack of ability to have those dialogues across difference. I think we've seen that on the political scale, both in the U.S. and across the world.
So when you're thinking about student free speech, what is the line that you would draw? So, for example, if you had been on that congressional, in that hearing, what would have been your answer to the question that led to the undoing of 3 of your colleagues? Is chanting genocidal slogans a violation of your university's policies?
All of our students commit to principles of being at Dartmouth, and part of that is being in a community where you're not going after people based on their race or religion and spewing hate. And yes, we don't tolerate that kind of rhetoric on our campus.
So that would have led to disciplinary action, potentially?
Potentially.
Yeah. Why do you think your colleagues had such a hard time answering that question in clear language?
Well, again, you know, I wasn't there with them, and I think that oftentimes it's hard to think on your feet in the moment. My research shows that. But again, it comes back to principles where we're creating a community where our goal is to make sure no one feels unwelcome on our campus, and we don't tolerate discrimination based on race, religion, gender. That's not how you put the best educational environment together.
Were you watching the hearing, or did you see recaps of it?
Yes, I watched all 5 hours.
And what was your main takeaway from that?
Look, I mean, I came into the Ivy League with a cohort of women presidents. I think it was monumental. And mostly I'm sad to see my cohort not there anymore. I'm now, in my second year, the 3rd longest serving Ivy president. And I think we have really a responsibility as leaders to tell the story of the great work that we do and to constantly work to recenter our institutions so different voices are there. So
we've, as obviously everyone knows, we've just seen a new administration come into power. This president has said that this marks a great awakening of free speech. Do you detect any change sort of in the zeitgeist around what's permissible to say and what isn't now?
Well, every administration is new, and I don't think the administration changes what we do on campus. Again, going back to our mission, our goal is to allow for a diversity of views for free expression on campus, an environment where people feel safe, and we will continue to do that on our campus.
I will say that Dartmouth, I think, is the only Ivy League school that has not faced a federal investigation into civil rights violations around allegations of anti-Semitism or Islamophobia. And clearly you seem determined to keep it that way. Do you anticipate dealing with this administration any differently than you would have previous?
Look, I'm optimistic about the power of American higher education. I think that we have students from around the world that want to be at places like Dartmouth, and Dartmouth is really unique in that we're only one of 7 universities in the U.S. where we are need blind. We meet full financial need without loans for domestic and international students. And I'm excited to continue to work on educating students and producing discoveries that change the world. And I think that's something we do with all administrations, and we will continue to do it with this one.
But do you think that the student bodies today are different than when you were a graduate student or an undergrad?
It's a really interesting question. I mean, one thing we know certainly is through COVID, our young people who are ending their career on our college campus today had very different experiences. And we also know that in the U.S. and across the world, there's higher levels of anxiety and depression among young people and lower levels of happiness. And so that's something we're actually really focused on at Dartmouth, mental health, because I really believe that in order to engage in those really challenging conversations, in order to put yourself in a brave and difficult environment, you have to feel okay about yourself and have the tools. We're producing the next generation of leaders for your workforce. We have to teach them to be resilient, to have conversations, to engage, to learn how to fail. And I think we as university leaders have a responsibility there.
Jonathan Haidt said people need to, the most important word he said for the audience earlier today was, I think, anti-fragility, to teach students that they're not fragile. I mean, there can be reasons why any individual student may be mentally fragile, but that in general, humans are far more resilient than maybe they give themselves credit for.
Yeah, I think we need to put young people in situations where they have the tools to face challenge and fail and get up. That's one of the reasons I'm so supportive of our athletes on campus. I think they experience that every day, and our students in the arts and other situations put themselves out there. And it's, again, about building this muscle of tools to be able to compete at the highest levels, whether it's on a playing field or in business or just having a conversation with someone who disagrees with you.
Is there enough ideological diversity on college campuses?
I think we have to be doing more to recenter our campuses. Dartmouth, we're really pushing at that, whether it's from the student body, whether it's from our faculty, whether it's from the speakers we bring on campus. But the whole idea, and I think the data are really clear, that when you get different people with different views and different ideologies pushing each other, you get to the best outcomes. So if our mission is knowledge creation, creating the next generation of leaders, backing up from that mission, we have to create that kind of diversity on our campus.
So let's just touch on one other form of diversity that seems to be under attack, which is racial diversity. In the wake of the Supreme Court's ending of race-conscious college admissions in 2023, in many schools, we've seen, in some cases, a fairly dramatic decline in Black and Hispanic students in particular. I don't think Dartmouth has really seen that.
Our diversity of our applicants was not different before or after the SCOTUS decision, and I believe we really use a holistic approach to looking at a student. And you can agree or disagree with the decision of the Supreme Court about affirmative action. Either of those are fine. But again, for us at Dartmouth, it goes back to this North Star to finding the students who are excelling wherever they are in their environment and bringing them to Dartmouth. And our admissions does that, I think, in a pretty remarkable way. They create a class that has different experiences, and whether that's your lived experience or your ideology or where you come from in the world. And that doesn't change depending on who's in office or whether or not students are allowed to indicate their race.
But is it important for universities to ensure a more diverse student body? Is that a responsibility that you have?
Diversity in all its forms, I think, are really important, and that comes from where you live, what you look like, your political viewpoint. All of that together, I think, is important, but our goal is to create a class that challenges each other and brings people together, and that means we look for the best and brightest across the world.
So I would imagine the spring sessions are about to begin at school?
We're on the quarter system, so we're in
Right.
week 3 of winter already.
Right.
Yeah.
And what is the temperature like on campus now? Not physically, obviously.
It's very cold physically.
Colder than here, I think.
Yeah. Yes, it is. Really, I think, exciting. We had a great fall. Again, we had so many different speakers on campus, and our students are doing everything from enjoying our sense of place in the outdoors to having debates on campus and hearing different speakers. And I'm excited for what we're doing at Dartmouth and how we can continue to tell the story of the power of universities focused on educational outcomes and missions first and foremost.
President Beilock, thank you so much for joining us. Thank you. Thank you all for joining us here this afternoon. You've been a great audience. Thank you. Big thank you to our speakers. As you could see, everyone is very busy here, so thank you for making time. And again, a special thank you to our afternoon tea sponsor, Prosus. But we're not done yet. We're not done yet, people. Come back at 6 p.m. for our Women Who Lead cocktails party, which is a celebration of women leaders here in Davos. We expect a very full house, so get here early, and we'll see you at 6. Thanks.